This mistakes to avoid tips and tricks video for Shadow of the Erdtree will only contain very early DLC footage. I'm not going to show you a single boss, anything remotely cool, other than my character's sick new drip. Let's go. Let me know any tips and tricks you have in the comments down below. Just before the DLC dropped, there was a patch that nerfed a whole bunch of weapons and spells. I mean, you probably should look that up if you're planning on using some of those in the DLC, but I didn't want to cover that here. The one thing I did want to cover from that patch is the new settings that you will find under the Settings tab and in Display. There are these two new settings called Enable Mark New Items and Show Recent Items tab. Enable both of these. They are incredible quality of life improvements for the game. Number one, the Enable Mark New Items will put an exclamation mark next to any new item you pick up. And number two, the Show Recent Items tab adds a brand new tab in your inventory called Recent, which will sort everything based on when you actually picked it up. This is like the biggest change to the game, especially just before the DLC, because there is so much new stuff to pick up. Like, you are constantly picking up like new crafting materials, weapons, armor, etc., etc. Like, it's so much stuff, and having this option is just incredible. Like, I'm so glad that they added this finally, and it'll definitely make a difference for any playthroughs really for Elden Ring from this point onwards. So definitely enable these settings before you do anything else as soon as you boot up the game. Now, I've talked about this in my other DLC prep videos, which you should go and watch if you need to find the bell bearings or, you know, get any help with the prep for the DLC. But the one thing I wanted to touch on here is that enemies in the DLC hit like a damn truck. Like, I was shocked how much damage they did. Now, I'll get into a way to mitigate that in a little bit, which is the new like progression mechanic. But the one thing to really point out here is that you obviously need a decent build before going into the DLC. I've got a ton of build videos on the channel that you can go and watch. I'll link some of those here. But the one thing to point out, regardless of if you're going to watch those videos or not, is that you need to be at least level 125, preferably 150 for the DLC to really be like okay. But the real thing about that is it doesn't necessarily mean just like a level up. It means you need vigor. Now, I went into the DLC starting with 50 vigor. It's probably not enough. Like, typically with all the base game stuff, 50 vigor has always just been like enough for me. I've never really needed more, but essentially you'll get like 2 or 3 shot by most enemies in the DLC with 50 vigor. You definitely want to have more than that, or at least 50 vigor if you're, you know, think you're good like I am. I'm really not good, but if you think you're good like I am, then, you know, you will sort of get away with that and can avoid some of that damage by dodging and etc. But so once you've got the vigor as well, make sure you've got those like damage reduction talismans and armor, you know, all of that other good stuff. I would also obviously recommend upgrade your weapons, like fully upgrade your weapons. You'll find a ton of smithing stones in the DLC for like upgrading all the new weapons, but you should make sure that your old weapons are absolutely upgraded before you go into the DLC as well. Like, they are probably the main way you actually deal additional damage and increase your damage output, not necessarily from your stat increases. So definitely make sure you've upgraded your weapons. Now, onto some actual DLC stuff. This is the really big one here, and very much like the base game in how you would explore Limgrave before you went and fought Margit, you really should be exploring the Gravesite Plains for the Scatter Tree Blessings and the Revered Spirit Ashes before you do really anything else and try and go and tackle one of the legacy dungeons like Ballarat, okay? So what these blessings are, the Scatter Tree Blessings increase your amount of damage that you deal and reduce the amount of damage you take, and it only works in the Lands of Shadow. You can actually see this in your status screen, and I've been doing a little bit of testing every time I've gone up one of the levels, which I'll probably have a video going out with all of the, you know, the specific details about how much those damage percentages are, etc., etc. But you should at least be Scatter Tree Blessing 3 before heading into, say, your first legacy dungeon being Ballarat Castle, which is sort of the first one that you'll be like ushered towards. While I've been talking here, I've been flashing up some of the locations where you can find these Scatter Tree Blessings as well. So if you need help finding them, you can definitely go to these locations, and you can pretty much get to 3 very easily just with some basic exploration as you sort of explore around. The Revered Spirit Ashes essentially do the same thing for your spirit summons and torrents, so reducing the amount of damage they take while increasing the amount of damage they do. And in the same vein, if you are using Spirit Ashes or plan to use them for any of like the boss fights, etc., you obviously want to collect these, and I am putting up some of the locations where you can find them on your screen here. But essentially, like, they're not as critical. It's really the Scatter Tree Blessings. Like, unless you are using the Spirit Ashes, then obviously you do want them, but I would definitely be hunting down the Scatter Tree Fragments so you can get the blessings, which is probably the main critical thing that you need to get. Next, let's talk about item discovery. And essentially, I would recommend, especially for your first playthrough, to bring either an arcane build, or at least equipped the Silver Scarab Talisman while you are out and about and exploring for that juicy item discovery. I'll link my talisman video here, which tells you exactly where you can get this talisman. But the reason you want to run this is because there is so many new weapons and armor and just things like stuff that all the enemies that you fight will drop, and you want to increase your item discovery so that there's a higher chance of those things dropping. Like, I've already been getting full sets of some of the new armors that the random enemies drops, as well as some of their weapons, and you definitely want to have a higher amount of item discovery so these drop for you if you're interested in tinkering with a lot of the new equipment. Really, the big critical tip here, and this is something you probably do in All Souls, but in case you don't, is that you should kill every enemy at least once to see what they drop, right? Like, you will definitely come across enemies that just look like normal enemies, you kill them and they drop something brand new that you haven't seen before. It absolutely happens in FromSoft games and most Souls games, to be honest, and you definitely want to be doing that here and killing anything that you come across, even if it's pretty tough, which most of the enemies are. One thing to note as well is that you will find like these dudes that carry like these pots on top of their heads. By defeating them, you will get Scatter fragments for the blessings as well, and there are other things like that you should keep an eye out for, and just defeat any enemy that looks out of place and really anything in between. The DLC is absolutely packed with NPCs. Now, it's really like feedback for the entire game is that you should obviously be talking to them regularly as you would in the base game, but write down anything that they ask you to find or anything that they want as, you know, just like a personal thing for me. I'm terrible at remembering that stuff. Anytime an NPC says like, go and do this or go and find this for me, I always write it down so that I don't forget. And a really good habit to get into is after every major boss, like any of those legacy dungeons, etc., go back to the location where those NPCs are. Luckily, they're marked on the map now, and talk to them again, as chances are they've probably got new dialogue for you. The critical path of the DLC is actually quite short, and compared to the base game, which is extremely long, like you can really push through the main story content in the DLC very quickly and skip through a bunch of these NPC quest lines. Typically, you'll find a lot of the NPCs at Miquella's Crosses. There's really 3 initial places that I recommend you go to before you've even gone to Ballarat. The first is the 3-Path Cross, which contains 2 NPCs. You've probably been here. It's one of the very first locations you'll go to. The next one is way off in the east called Pillar Path Cross, which contains 1 NPC there that actually has an inventory that you should go because he's got a perfume bottle you can buy, and you'll need to bring him something in the future. And the last one is just up the way from the 3-Path Cross called the Main Gate Cross, which you'll obviously run into. There are 2 NPCs here. You'll definitely want to exhaust their dialogue and do the thing that they want you to do. I'm being intentionally vague here for obvious reasons. Like, I don't want to show or tell you guys too much in case you want to come across things for yourself, but just wanted to make sure that, you know, before you do anything major, you've at least been to these 3 locations and you've met those NPCs at those locations, and then you can sort of progress from there. There is a new exploration mechanic that I honestly did not realize until I read a certain note, which, you know, is showing, I guess, how out of touch I am with Elden Ring a little bit at the moment. But there is these spirit springs that you may come across that are actually locked. You'll be able to see like the wind, but you won't be able to use them. Now, in order to unlock them, you'll need to find like a stack of rocks nearby, which you'll just need to destroy, and then you unlock the spirit spring. This is really useful for this DLC, as there is a lot of verticality in the way that you travel around the DLC, like both above and below you. Pretty much in all of like the open world areas of the DLC, there is always something below you or above you or both, and finding out how to actually get there is quite difficult. Obviously, to go up, you want spirit springs, and unlocking them is definitely the way to go. And a lot of the underground areas, you probably need to go through like caves and, you know, the catacombs, but they're very different now. But you may actually be able to drop way down below one and end up in a completely different area, which has happened to me as well. So obviously, you know, it's not new advice, but, you know, explore, hit walls, look for secrets, you know, look behind everything, because there's always something behind the main, like, you know, pretty looking thing. So do all of that typical stuff that you would have done throughout the base game, and you'll have great success in the DLC. Now, I've got a bunch of videos coming out for the DLC, including some best weapons and some other good stuff that you should be grabbing as soon as you launch into the DLC. So I'll have that coming out for you guys very soon. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.